Once upon a time, in a small village, there was a girl named Awele. She was the only child of her mother. Awele lived a lonely life because no one in the village wanted to be her friend. The villagers did not like her mother. Her mother was known for spending time with different men in exchange for money. Everyone in the village talked about it, and parents warned their children to stay away from Awele. Because of this, Awele was always by herself. She would watch other children play and laugh together, but no one ever included her. She carried the shame of her mother's action wherever she went, and it made her heart heavy. One evening, Awele's mother went out as she always did, but that night her mother did not come back. Awele sat in their hut, waiting and listening for her footsteps. She stayed awake throughout the night, but her mother did not still return home. The next day, Awele went out to look for her mother. She hoped to see her walking down the path to their hut, but there was no sign of her. The sun set and the sky grew dark, yet her mother didn't return. Awele had not eaten since the previous night and her stomach was empty. She felt weak and very hungry. She decided to go to other huts in the village to ask for food. Awele knocked on doors and begged, but they chased her away. They called her names and reminded her that she was the child of a prostitute. Even though Awele cried and pleaded, they didn't care. After many rejections, she finally found a kind woman named Waneka. Waneka gave her food and asked her about her mother. Awele explained that her mother had not come home and she didn't know where she was. Waneka felt sorry for Awele. She decided to let Awele stay with her and her two daughters, Ujunwa and Adure, until her mother returned. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but Awele's mother never came back. It became clear that she was gone for good. Waneka treated Awele like her own child, feeding her and clothing her. Awele began to call Waneka mother and saw Ujunwa and Adure as her sisters. The three girls grew up together in love and peace. One day, Waneka fell seriously ill. The three girls did everything they could to care for her. Despite all their efforts, Waneka's condition worsened and she eventually passed away. Her death left a deep sadness in the hearts of her daughters and Awele, who had come to love her as a mother. A few months after Waneka's burial, the town crier made an announcement that all maidens should gather at the palace the next morning. The purpose of this gathering was to select a wife for the prince, and every eligible maiden was eager to be chosen. The next day, the maidens gathered at the palace, dressed in their finest clothes. Each maiden was given a covered calabash, carefully sealed so no one could see what was inside, and they were instructed not to open it. Then it was announced that inside one of the calabashes lay the prince's royal gold bracelet. That the maiden who found the bracelet in her calabash would be chosen as the prince's wife and become the future queen of the kingdom. After receiving their calabashes, the maidens were instructed to take them home and return to the palace the following day. At home, Awele, Ujunwa, and Adure sat together. They decided to open their calabashes to see what they had received. Ujunwa opened hers first and found a simple necklace. Adure followed and also found an ordinary necklace. Then it was Awele's turn. She lifted the cover of her calabash, and to everyone's shock and joy, it contained the prince's royal gold bracelet. The three girls were overcome with excitement. The thought of Awele becoming royalty filled their hearts with joy. Ujunwa and Adure were especially thrilled because they knew that Awele's new position would bring honor to their home. They would be part of the royal family and they would be treated with respect as sisters of the queen. Ujunwa, filled with excitement, decided that she would prepare a special meal to celebrate Awele's good fortune. She happily announced her plan to cook their favorite dish, ensuring it would be a joyful moment for them all. She hurried to the market to buy the necessary ingredients. She returned home and, without wasting time, began to prepare the meal. Once the food was ready, she dished it into three plates. But as she dished Awele's plate, her hands trembled slightly as she brought out a small bag containing a deadly substance. Quietly, she poisoned Awele's food before arranging the plates on the table. Without any suspicion, the three girls sat down to eat, chatting happily about the exciting life that awaited Awele as the prince's wife. They laughed and imagined what it would feel like to be called royals. Suddenly, Awele began to cough violently. Her face twisted in pain as blood dripped from her mouth. Adure, alarmed and confused, quickly grabbed a cup of water and tried to help Awele drink, but it didn't stop the coughing. The coughing grew weaker until it stopped completely. A moment of silence followed before Adure realized with horror that Awele had stopped breathing. Awele was dead. Adure froze, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Her body trembled as she thought of running out to call for help, but Ujunwa grabbed her arm and stopped her. Ujunwa, with a cold expression, told Adure that she had poisoned Awele. Adure was too shocked to speak. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at her sister, unable to believe the words she had just heard. Ujunwa showed no remorse. She said there was no way she could sit back and allow the daughter of a prostitute to become queen. She believed that if Awele married the prince, she would eventually look down on them and treat them as if they were nothing. Adure's heart broke as she listened to her sister speak with such bitterness. She could not understand how jealousy could turn Ujunwa's heart so dark, leading her to take the life of someone who had grown up as a sister to them. Finally, Ujunwa warned Adure not to tell anyone about what had happened. She said that exposing her would only bring trouble to both of them, as no one would believe that Adure had nothing to do with it. Ujunwa's words were sharp and commanding, leaving Adure paralyzed with fear and sorrow. She could do nothing but sit there crying and wondering how everything had gone so horribly wrong. In the dead of the night, when the entire village was silent and still, Ujunwa and Adure crept out of their huts. Their hands shook as they carried Awele's lifeless body to a secluded spot. They dug a shallow grave and buried Awele in it. Adure's tears fell steadily as they buried Awele. Her heart felt heavy with grief and guilt, and her conscience was already tormenting her. She thought about Awele's laughter, her kind heart, and the bond they had shared. Now she was gone, and Adure had played a role in covering up the truth. Fear consumed her, for she believed that if anyone found out, they would never believe she was innocent. Helping Ujunwa bury Awele made her feel like an accomplice, and she could not see a way out of the darkness that now surrounded her. The following morning, Ujunwa prepared herself for the palace gathering. She took the calabash that had been meant for Awele and walked confidently to the palace along with other maidens. She carried herself as though nothing had happened. Adure, however, stayed at home. Her body was weak and her spirit was crushed. She could not bear the thought of facing anyone. Memories of the previous day haunted her, and she replayed the events in her mind over and over. She did not think she could live with the weight of it forever. The thought of taking her own life began to creep into her mind. As her despair deepened, Adure decided that she would end her suffering in the same way Awele's life had ended. She would prepare their favorite meal and poison it. She went to the market and bought the finest ingredients she could find. She also purchased a deadly substance, knowing what she intended to do. When she returned home, she began to cook with great care, making sure everything was perfect. Every step reminded her of her mother, and the tears she had been holding back began to flow again. She poured her love and sorrow into the meal, knowing it would be her last. When the food was ready, she sat quietly for a moment, looking at the pot of steaming food. Her hands trembled as she added the deadly substance, stirring it into the dish. Adure carefully served some food into a plate, her hands trembling slightly. When she was done, she heard Ujunwa's voice calling her name with excitement. Ujunwa walked in, her face glowing with happiness. She announced that she had been chosen as the prince's wife and had come back to pack her belongings. She said she would be leaving for the palace the next morning to begin her training as royalty. Adure forced a smile and pretended to share in Ujunwa's joy. Her heart, however, was heavy with bitterness and sorrow. She held back her emotions, masking them with a fake expression of happiness. As Ujunwa noticed the food Adure had prepared, the aroma caught her attention. She praised the delicious smell and eagerly took a plate to serve herself. Adure watched silently as Ujunwa helped herself to the meal. She felt no urge to stop her. In her heart, she believed that Ujunwa deserved to face the consequences of her actions. At least, it was her own way of preventing a murderer from becoming the queen of the village. As they ate together, Ujunwa spoke excitedly about her new life as royalty. She painted vivid pictures of the wealth, power, and status she would soon enjoy, just as Awele had done before. Adure nodded along, keeping up her false smile. It wasn't long before Ujunwa's joy turned into distress. She suddenly began to cough out blood violently. In just a few seconds, Adure too began to cough out blood. After a short moment of struggling for their lives, they both died. The following morning, some palace maids arrived at their home to help Ujunwa carry her belongings to the palace. To their horror, they found the lifeless bodies of Ujunwa and Adure. They raised an alarm, and soon the villagers gathered around, whispering in shock and confusion. As people searched the area, they discovered the shallow grave where Awele had been buried. They discovered that Ujunwa and Adure had died from food poisoning but no one could determine who had poisoned the food or why. The mystery of their death became a tale passed down through generations. It was remembered as the tragic story of the three sisters, Ujunwa, Adure, and Awele.